What's up, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back with another video. We're going to do some more Blu-ray talking today. And many thanks to everybody who wrote in and took part of the contest for Ant-Man that I had a couple weeks ago, where I gave away some download cards and a group of posters to 4 people. And so yeah, thanks to the lucky winners, Geraldine and Chris and Mark and Dan. Thanks again for writing in. Thanks for taking part of it. And hopefully you enjoyed the flick, if you got a chance to check it out, or just at least enjoyed the posters. And I actually got a copy for myself to review from the Disney/Marvel people, and which is cool, because I actually had missed this in the theater. So it was time to finally sit down and check out Marvel's Ant-Man. And yeah, one of the most interesting things about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU as it's been called now, is the fact that they're able to tackle characters that weren't always, A-list characters. Yeah, obviously, if you're going to adapt some Marvel comics for the big screen, you're going to want to do Spider-Man and, maybe Captain America, the Hulk, something like that. But if they're going to kind of keep digging and digging into the kind of universe and bringing a true cinematic counterpart to that, they have to start doing characters that are more like Nova or something like that, or something you might have read in the 70s. But Ant-Man has a nice heritage to it, but it's just one of those characters that has been part of the Marvel Universe along the way, and you may have tripped across Ant-Man in numerous comics, etc., but it's not necessarily the first thing on people's minds when they want to see a movie based on Marvel comic books. But I think after the success of the first Thor movie, where they were able to kind of capture the gonzo, Jack Kirby-esque Asgardian visuals and make it work in the context of all the other Marvel movies, etc. Once that hit, then the kind of floodgates opened, and they were able to pull off things like Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's so cool how tonally these films can be very different from one another. And Ant-Man definitely is an example of that. It's essentially a comedy heist film, and as well as a superhero with a super suit film. But if you are someone who has been kind of keeping tabs on the production of this film in general, you know that there was a lot of interest in it due to the fact that Edgar Wright, who had created the Cornetto's trilogy with Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and The World's End and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, he was going to take this on. He was a big fan of the character, etc., and had written a script with Joe Cornish, and then things fell apart. So the cynical fans were pretty quickly to assume that it was going to be a failure. And then Paul Rudd teamed up with Adam McKay to do a draft of the script, and Peyton Reed stepped on to direct. And normally you'd think, well, yeah, whatever, who cares? But that said, I'm actually a big fan of Peyton Reed's film, Down with Love. And yeah, it's the only DVD I have that's in a pink case. And particularly because this came out the exact same week The Matrix Reloaded did. And The Matrix Reloaded had disappointed me on so many levels, and I've since grown softer on it over time, but when I first initially saw it, I was like, wow, this is in absolutely no way like the film I had envisioned in my head over the past couple of years. So then I went and saw this, and it was just like this celebration of cinema, and it was just so full of joy and excitement, etc., and a great kind of widescreen presentation. So I was like, whoever this Peyton Reed guy is, I gotta check out some more of his stuff. So when I heard he was tackling Ant-Man with Paul Rudd, another actor who I quite enjoyed, and Michael Pena involved, and Michael Douglas, and Evangeline Lilly, and I mean, come on, it sounds like a really, really cool release, and it is. So it's the tale of Scott Lang, a thief, master thief, who's now been released from prison, and very unheroic kind of hero for the film, because you see him just getting beat down in prison the first thing, and then he hangs out with a bunch of other ex-cons. He's determined to get his life on track because he has a daughter, and she's living with the mother, played by Judy Greer, and the mother's new boyfriend, a cop, played by Bobby Cannavale. And there's that dynamic, that family dynamic that's kind of imbued, shot through this film, that gives it a lot of its heart. Meanwhile, while he's trying to create a new life for himself, hustling ice cream at Baskin-Robbins, there's this constant temptation to get back into crime, and Michael Pena hangs out with a bunch of guys who are also still perhaps getting involved in thievery. That's one of the bits that may leave you a little itchy, is that, of course, it's got to have a Latino actor, a black actor, and a Russian someone playing a Russian character as the criminals in the film, even though they're lovable criminals. It'd be nice to be said. Love Michael Pena. He's a great actor, and I'd love to see him doing something that's not necessarily an ex-con. So there's that whole case where, yes, it makes sense for this guy, Scott Lang, to be hanging out with the guys that were once criminals. But then on the other hand, it seems to enforce stereotypes. Anyways, that said, the film moves along at a pretty decent clip. There were some scenes early on that I'm like, wait a second, stuff was cut out there, which I was proven exactly right later in the special features. I think there's a scene early on where Scott goes to visit his daughter and gives her this terrifying stuffed doll, this bunny. And he has a conversation with Judy Greer out on the patio. And then a second later, he's in his van driving away, but Bobby Cannavale and his daughter are out waving goodbye to him. And it really seemed like it did not fit the scene that came prior. And sure enough, in the deleted scenes on here, you learn that there is more information. He goes back in the house, and there's more information, and that directly ties to him leaving. And it makes sense why those characters would be waving him goodbye at that point. So it does move fast, and sometimes maybe at a detriment to intelligibility, but, well, not really. It's just some scenes that seem like a little bit abstract. But quickly he falls into the clutches, basically, because there's a lot of orchestrations going on early on with Dr. Hank Pym, who is played by Michael Douglas in this film. And there's a neat little flashback early on that gives some glimpses of other favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe and television universe characters, where Dr. Pym is not very confident in the safety of the world with this suit that he's created out there. And it's this suit that can make the wearer transform down to insect size, and also gives you insect-like strength and all sorts. He's got all sorts of great powers where he can communicate with insects and ants in particular. Then he realizes that his company is now being taken over by Corey Stoll's character, who Corey Stoll looks identical to Peter Sarsgaard. And in fact, I watched the film. I knew Corey Stoll was in it, but I watched the film for the first time entirely thinking that it was Peter Sarsgaard during the entire running time. And then only after I watched it again, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, it's Corey Stoll. So they may as well be the same person. But yeah, the film is all about the kind of family dynamic, either father-daughter, father-son, etc. Paul Rudd has a strained relationship with his family, and he wants to be with his daughter. Hank Pym has a daughter of his own, Hope Van Dyne, played by Evangeline Lilly, and she's got 1 foot in the realm of Corey Stoll, and then 1 foot in her dad's house, where he's still this tinkering inventor type. And they've got a very, very strained relationship, so that gives a lot of heart to the story, and also helps Scott Lang become part of this story. But then there's also the kind of protege story. Corey Stoll thinks of Hank Pym as his father, but has never fully been given what he expected as a son, a chosen one. So yeah, there's a great dynamic there, and then it quickly just becomes about the heist of. There's a new suit that's been kind of created out of the designs that Hank Pym had put together, and he believes that humanity isn't ready for it. In fact, there's a scene where Corey Stoll lays out the kind of potential for espionage and tactical murder that you can do in a world that is generally every inch of it is surveilled. Then you can use this suit, shrink yourself to tiny proportions, and kill heads of state, etc., and do all sorts of nasty shenanigans. So Paul Rudd is enlisted to once again become a thief. You see in the trailer, you've seen the kind of comic bits there where he's going to steal some stuff. And there's a quick kind of montage scene where there's a lot of information dump thrown on you. It seems to move a little fast, but yeah, whatever. You have to get to the meat of the story. And once he gets the suit on, he shrinks down to tiny proportions. And the film looks incredible in those. They have used a lot of macro photography. There's been a lot of shrinking man and shrinking woman films over the years. And this is the first time I've seen something that looks a little bit different. Usually it's just, you're in a giant model of a dollhouse, and a cat comes to attack you and all this stuff. And there is some encounters with large animals like rats, etc., like that. But the macro photography, and they go to length to show, like Ridley Scott loves to use shadows and smoke in the light. This uses a lot of kind of dust particles. So there's a lot of that going on, and then there's just this neat look to the macro photography, and it looks great with the main character integrated into it. And the shrinking effect, it's one of those things in the comic books where you see, it's like motion lines where someone runs and there's like a streak behind them. In this, there's that kind of like shrinking residual silhouette in white. And how do you make that work? And they made it work. They did a great job at creating that in a digital fashion, and it worked each and every single time. It was really, really cool. And it even gets into a lot of great scenes where he can shrink and then reappear at full size. It makes for some great fight scenes. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. If there was any complaint, it was that the heist scene. They talk about this film being like an Ocean's film, like a superhero Ocean's film, and I didn't think the heist itself was given enough time. Like there's a lot of character development and Ant-Man introduction, etc. So that takes up a lot of time. So the heist itself, I think, could have been like expanded a little bit more and given a little bit more room to breathe and a little bit more tension, perhaps. That said, it is pretty fun, and there's a rousing finale. Even if it does lift some kind of gags from other films, like you've seen in the trailer. There's the bit with the Yellow Jacket versus Ant-Man, and they're fighting on a toy train track, and then it cuts to the long distance shot of a normal person's perspective as the train just kind of goes bleh and falls off the track, which is pretty much lifted from the tiny cowboy and Roman soldier bit in one of the Night at the Museum films, where you see this tiny little explosion from a distance. But hey, if you're going to steal something from something, that works. And yeah, there's a lot of fun. The characters are great. It's lighthearted. It moves quickly. And I love the fact that it's got a completely different tone than a lot of the other Marvel films, but yet fits into the kind of universe. There's crossovers with Captain America, and this leads directly into Civil War. They said that is a little weird that this film is shot in 1.85 to 1, and one of the coolest things is that Peyton Reed in the behind-the-scenes features talks about his decision to shift from the typical Marvel, Panavision 2.35 1 or 2.40 to 1 aspect ratio, and shift it to a more flat Academy ratio, 1.85 to 1. So there's a little bit more vertical resolution. It seemed to work better with the concept of shrinking this character. So it seems a little weird at one point where he actually cuts to a widescreen teaser for another Marvel product. So that was a little, jarring, but who cares? Overall, the product works. It works like gangbusters. It's a lot of fun, and you don't have to have seen all the other films. I've actually been dropping balls piecemeal here and there, catching up with all the Marvel films, and that was always one of the coolest things about being a fan back in the day, reading the comics, is they would always cross over, and there'd be like a little tiny sidebar that would say, see Iron Man-ish number 75 to have more information about that story. But when you do that stuff, it's gotta work organically within the issue or whatever you're reading, and you can't have to have seen that other stuff or read that other stuff to make this story work. And it's been so cool that now that Marvel has the rights to all this stuff and they can do these films, they can cross over like that. And it really is this realized cinematic version of that, comic book crossover. So that was really cool. They've been able to pull that off, and they've been able to do it well. Whereas you don't need to see Captain America Winter Soldier to understand this film. It may inform it and kind of illuminate some aspects of it, but you don't have to see it. So if this film works on its own, it works on its own. And it does. The tone's great. It's funny. It's fun. And definitely recommend checking it out. So, Blu-ray. And I always like when the Blu-rays come in like a different packaging. So this one's got a black case, which is pretty neat. And it's got 3D and 2D and also a digital copy as well. The digital copy, unfortunately, is not tied with ultraviolet. I mean, it's not like I love ultraviolet in particular, but it seems to be the one digital copy that format that everybody's using, and it is a nice way to have all of your films in one place on the cloud. That said, I have very limited faith that that cloud service will be around forever, so it's really pales in comparison to actually having a physical library that cannot be destroyed unless you crack it over your knee or light it on fire. But it is nice having your collection all in one place. So with the Disney movies, they're doing it separately. And one of the things I appreciated, though, is you can sync it with different accounts. So if you have an Amazon account, it'll show up in your Amazon video. So I do have an Amazon account. So I thought that was pretty cool, that now I can watch Ant-Man with my other Amazon movies if I'm going on Prime or something. Visually, it looks great. There's a lot of color in this film. The only time I was kind of let down per se was it seemed like a lot of the daylight scenes were somewhat washed out. Especially there's a scene at the Avengers compound, or one of the Avengers compounds, where Ant-Man encounters another character from the MCU. I don't want to talk about it too much, but apparently some of the background plates for that were done digitally by ILM, and I thought a lot of that kind of looked very muted and pale, whereas you should be some lush greenery in the background, very sunlit, bright daylight shots. So some of that stuff looked a little bit washed out, which I was surprised about. But a lot of the rest of the film, it takes place at night and dark corners inside Hank Pym's house, which is got this great kind of like reddish look to everything, and that stuff was great. And the colors when Scott works at Baskin Robbins, his pink shirt is just explodes off of the screen. So yeah, the contrast levels were really rock solid, and detail is pretty amazing. This thing was shot digitally, so it's pretty fascinating how you can walk right up to the screen and not see film grain. There's a little bit of kind of noise in some of the darker scenes, etc., but other than that, it's solid, it's very detailed, it's very nice looking, very modern looking picture. The audio is DTS HD Master Audio 7.1. It is a very, very aggressive soundtrack. I had a blast with it. There's a lot of source music. There's a lot of soundtrack music that's very loud and brazen. In fact, one of the early opening ones, I think the fidelity of the song itself was a little shrill, but it's not because of the soundtrack. It's because of the tune they were using. But they do use a lot of popular music that's loud and aggressive. But that's not just where the soundtrack shines. It's a lot of Foley effects and realistic 3D, or as Widescreen Review would call it, holophonic effects. Very, very aggressive in the surround. So it's one of those cases where if you have a surround sound system and you've got it set up perfectly so each speaker's putting out the right amount of decibels, and then you watch something, you're like, oh man, it's all coming from the front stage. This is a feature where you feel like your rear speakers are alive and coming at you. So I don't have a 3D projector. I wasn't able to experience it in 3D. I hear this film is very immersive in 3D, and it's one of the better outings like this and Dread, and of course Avatar, where 3D works. But in this case, the surround sound made up for the lack of being enveloped in the visuals of it. It really felt completely immersed in it. Really, really great, lively soundtrack. The extras are pretty fun on this sucker. There's a couple featurettes, typical, not really fluff pieces, but not as in-depth as something, obviously the Criterion Collection would put together. There's the Making of an Ant-Sized Heist, a how-to guide, which is just a general kind of making of. There's Let's Go to the Macroverse, which takes a little bit more of a look into the macro photography and how they pulled that together. And then there's this whole WHIH Newsfront piece with a bunch of faux interviews with like Pym Tech and like Corey Stoll's character Darren Cross, and there's some interviews with Scott Lang, etc., and talking about his heist that originally got him in prison, and it's got the character Christine Everhart, who you've seen in other Marvel products. So it's cheeky, kind of fun, and it kind of connects to the other films. And there's like a little bit of like news bites and updates and all that stuff from that angle. There's some deleted and extended scenes. As I mentioned before, the deleted scenes do kind of help the pacing of the film, I think, a little bit more, or would have helped connect the film in the beginning half a little bit. There's actually a really extended scene where Scott Lang pretends to be a cable TV operative to inspect Hank Pym's house in order to get a feel for it and scope it out and learn where everything is. And it worked, and I do understand the reason why they cut it out too, though. So yeah, there's some pretty entertaining extended and deleted scenes there. And then there's the audio commentary from Peyton Reed and Paul Rudd, which is fun, just very light. There never any kind of dead spots or quiet moments in it. They're just talking nonstop. And it's cool because Paul Rudd's not only the actor, but he's a co-writer of it. And Peyton Reed and him get into every angle of the film, which is cool. It's not just like, hey, we shot this on this day, etc. So they can really hash it out and talk about it. And that was great when I heard Peyton Reed talking about the aspect ratio of the film and all that stuff. So as a film buff, I nerd out on that sort of thing. And I do like that he kind of he enjoys talking about the technical aspects of it a little bit. But yeah, very, very entertaining commentary track. It shot through really fast, went by like lightning, and yeah, and I liked, they also appreciate the fact that Marvel is willing to let a film that's closer to the Ocean series exist in line with things like Captain America, etc. And they seem to be just as blown away as us fans are, that Marvel's understanding that this is cool, and it gives you a kind of dynamic film base. So yeah, it was really fun watching all that stuff, and I'd like to check it out in 3D perhaps, but I don't have any 3D viewing equipment. But definitely, if you like the kind of vibe of Guardians of the Galaxy, obviously this isn't quite as sci-fi, but if you like that lighthearted fun of it, which is definitely in keeping with the tone of Marvel Comics, especially in the 70s when I used to read it like crazy. Yeah, if you dug that, I think you'll get a kick out of this. So, don't think about too much like, what would Edgar Wright have done and all that stuff. And this is a failure because he wasn't in on it, and this is, they're turning into a comedy and all that stuff. No, it really is true to the kind of vibe and spirit of Marvel Comics, and I had a blast with it. So, looking forward to watching it again. And probably again. And I still need to catch up on some of the other flicks. But thanks for hanging out. Thanks for enduring some more talk about Blu-rays and all that stuff. I'll be back with some spotlight videos for Laserdiscs and all sorts of stuff. And maybe a few more James Bond books. I have to show that big archive collection book and all sorts of other stuff. And yeah, I got to talk about The Force Awakens too. I still have to finally do that. Of course, right? So hopefully everybody's having a great holiday season. And we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.